Hello, everybody. My name is Seth Chagi from the world of paleoanthropology, and today we are here talking with Professor Dr. Lee Berger, as we have done so in the past. He is graciously visiting us again, and I'm very excited to have him here to talk to. There's been so much that has gone on since the last time we've talked, Lee. I mean, you have announced a new site, you have announced many, many new fossils that have come out of this site. And one of the greatest things is you're taking us along on this journey with you. And I think that's where I would like to start today is just what are some of the challenges of bringing the world with you as you do something like this?
Well, thanks again for having me, Seth, and hello again to your viewers. I hope the audio is a little better now, and that we can have a lovely conversation. This has been quite a journey. This all started with our exploration project. The site's not new in the sense that we discovered it a few years ago, but I didn't work it, and the reason I didn't go after the site was there was every reason not to dig the site. The site's very dangerous. It was heavily blasted by miners back in the early 20th century or late 19th century, leaving lots of overhanging rock that's still loose and falls all the time. Some fell in an earthquake just a couple of months ago. The first fossil we found was a very pretty fossil. It was two hominid teeth and part of a fragment of a mandible, but it was found completely out of context. It was found at, this is actually the wallpaper here is the 105 site, and it was found just below this this opening where that light is over my shoulder if I move to the side a little bit. And we were having a lot of discussion in the exploration group as to whether or not it had been thrown down that because there are fossils and other deposits external to this cave, or whether it came from the interior. And it was just completely out of context. The site had been used for a movie. Everything was disturbed. It was every reason not to do it. And we found this also right in the middle of Homo naledi. And, that takes a lot of focus, a big project like that. And that was a huge project, multidisciplinary. We were still doing and still are doing the Malapa project in Sadiba. And so it kind of sat by the side. And then COVID came along and forced us all to step back and reevaluate where we are in the world and what we're doing. And what it caused me to do is I suddenly realized I had this exploration team that wasn't going to get back out in the field anytime soon. Caving, the kind of exploring that we've been doing the last many years, is very dangerous. It has to be done as a team. You're in confined spaces, high humidity. There are lung things that can happen to you, like histoplasmosis and all of that. And basically, exploration was shut down in the way that we've been doing it. I was trying to think, what do you do? Do you end your exploration program? Or do you come up with something else? And at the same time, I decided to disperse my staff into actually use our field school huts that I'd set up out at Rising Star, because there aren't going to be many field schools. We were going to look at holding a Cambridge field school as part of a collaboration I have with them. And it was all ready to go, and COVID has changed that world too. And so I quickly converted them into laboratories. And as I was doing it, I needed a way to communicate with those preparators and technicians. And so we set that up for sort of conferencing comms, so everyone was separated and I could talk with them easily. And yet I still had these staff and all these resources sitting idle. And I thought back to this 105 site, which is on the Rising Star property, 200 meters away from where we enter the Dinaledi chamber. It's a different system entirely. And so I said, I'm going to go up there and take a look at this and see if it's as bad as I actually have convinced myself it is. And I walked into the cave and was looking around the cave and walked over to where this fossil had done. And, it literally went through almost the same mental process I went through if you've ever heard me tell the tale of the discovery of Sediba at Malapa, particularly the discovery of MH2, when we went back there and we're staring. We worked the whole morning at the site and didn't find anything. 14 scientists, and I stood back and looked at the site, trying to imagine, how could the block Matthew found had got way over there, and trying to visualize what was happening 100 or more years ago with these miners. And I saw the humerus sticking out of the wall in front of us. Well, I was doing the same exercise. I went to the spot, looking around the cave, and said, what was happening here more than 100 years ago, and where could this block had come from? And I looked over at a pile of rubble on the far side, and I said, if I were stacking rocks here, I'd come from there. And I walked over, literally picked up the first block, turned it over, and I could see that fantastic image, which you might have seen in those very first videos I posted, of the back of a hominid molar. And it blew me away. What are the odds that the first thing you pick up is that? And so when I brought it back down, I brought it back down. I'd already applied for the permit from the South African Heritage Research Agency to open the site, because I didn't have any other site I could get to. And I looked at all of this tech that we had installed and how it could be used. And I thought, why not take this live? There's a lot of reasons not to take a find like this live. One is you can embarrass yourself. And a lot of people, I think, they particularly maybe the generation before us say, no, we must know exactly what something is before we ever tell anyone, because there's sort of an attitude in the kind of ivory tower scientists that people can't accept to actually see the process of science, which makes mistakes, it makes errors, it's risky, you often don't find everything. The pace of these discoveries are often very, very slow. And it's not, this exciting Indiana Joneses like thing that everyone imagines, but luckily we've had Malapa and Sediba, which was one of the richest hominid sites in the world. And then, of course, the remarkable Dinaledi chamber, and then the multiple discoveries at Rising Star. And all of those had convinced me that people understand that it's a process and that they can watch it. It attracts a lot of people into the science. It gets big audiences. It particularly enthuses young people and tells the truth about what goes on. And I'm really passionate that part of the problems, particularly in places like the US, are that we scientists keep the entire process in this sort of black box. You might hear we've made a discovery or working on something, then we go quiet for 2, 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and then we pronounce to you what it is. That's actually not how science works at all. It's a never-ending process of hypothesis testing, and there, and you do make mistakes. And so I decided to do that. Well, it has turned out that 105 is a spectacular site. I think it's every bit as rich as Malapa, and what it's looking like so far is it could be different from, but as rich as the Dinaledi site and the Rising Star sites. It's got the makings of an extraordinary site, and it's really exciting. And so everyone's along for the ride like we are.
That's just amazing. And I mean, I know you said when you found the first molar, my first thought was, well, if Lee Berger's picking it up, of course it's a hominid. But
yeah, it doesn't work that way.
Of course, these things are so rare. To find another site that has hominid fossils, it's just, there aren't words. And now we know from what we know about Homo naledi and what we know about Sediba, this is not them.
No, this is not them. I can see that. Look, I mean, I don't want to go too much into guessing, because that's not part of the scientific process. We formulate hypotheses, but it is pretty clear what this isn't very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a human. It's anyone who's seen those images sees this is a mega-toothed hominid.
Right.
The teeth are just gigantic. It's not. That's not what Sediba is. You can see that, you don't have to be a paleoanthropologist. I think I put up an image of four second molars together to see that it's not that, but it is a megatoothed hominid. This and the We have at least two individuals so far, and that are different because of eruption state. So you can see that those are different individuals, yet they're the same. They're very much like each other. So I know it's not Homo naledi. Homo naledi is not a megatoothed hominid. The postcrania that we've got so far, it's not. We don't have a lot of articular ends yet, but that'll come. We're literally planning on opening up in a big way on next Monday, and
Oh, wow.
I fully expect to see the joining blocks that are going to join with this particular material as we pull it out, and we'll get those heads and stuff. You may have seen we're looking at kind of a strange pelvis. I don't know if that's a hominid or not. It is sort of flaring a little bit more than one would expect for a bovid which is an antelope or a carnivore. But there are funny things in the extinct fossil record. We don't know how old this is and not, so you're kind of learning as we do. That could turn into an antelope tomorrow, and it wouldn't surprise me at all. But it'd be a weird one, but it might be. I'd actually at this stage love some fauna because right now all we've pretty much seen are hominids out of this site, and we do see some hominids in situ, and we have some other pieces I'll be showing people in the future that are very promising. But we also need the fauna to know what the world is like, get a hypothesis for how old this is. I think we'll be able to date this site. It's almost the perfect hard breccia site. It's an infill, as you've seen in some of the videos. It looks like a talus cone, but it's got bounding flow stones, which you got basal flow stones, and it's got flow stones that have actually formed into it. So we will get a maximum and minimum age on it. I think cosmogenics, there's some big quartzes and other things in it. So cosmogenics are going to help optically, and we'll see. We'll actually see what it does, but so I don't have any idea of how old it is. Some of the sites on Bolt's Farm are thought to be extraordinarily old, this is halfway between Rising Star and the famous Bolt's Farm sites. But I just can't tell you. And what Homo naledi taught me was, you can't take the anatomy of a hominid like this and try and guess its age. It's a fool's errand.
Right. Which I remember sitting on the edge of my seat, just as so many people did, waiting for those naledi dates to come out, and the shock at just how young those fossils were.
Yeah.
We really don't know what's out there. Like you said, this fossil could turn out to be a strange antelope tomorrow, and we just don't know. And I think that's really something that encapsulates so many people's imaginations.
Yeah. So I mean, the hominid fossils, by the way, that we're talking about, they are hominid fossils. But I was talking more particularly about this little cluster of pelvic remains that are coming out. I mean, it is fascinating too for people to see how these sites can go. I mean, there's a hominid incisor that came out right next to this, and you can't always draw a conclusion that things that are next to each other, particularly in these type of deposits, are the same animal. It sometimes doesn't work that way unless there's very strong evidence of articulation. And that's why I'm also cautious that the hominids, the postcranial hominid remains that we definitely have, that come out of the same block as that molar are the same individual. I can't tell you that at this stage. It is a remarkable coincidence if they're not, and it means that there are parts of that deposit that would be super rich in hominid material. But that's, you would have said a decade ago that never happens, but it's happened at Malapa, it happened at Rising Star. so it clearly can happen.
Which was the perfect segue to my next question. Over the last 10 years, I mean, the field and not solely by you, but of course, massively by you, but the field has moved forward in many ways, like dramatically
Oh,
in many ways. And it used to be thought that, there was no more. We're done. There's no more fossils.
yeah.
We've found what there is to find. You and others have clearly shown this is not the case. What have you learned from the cradle recently to show you that there is still more? Obviously, besides actually finding it.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of things. I've actually was speaking with some fellow scientists about this recently. The idea that 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 we need these resets all the time. I don't know if you've seen my lectures before, but I often talk about backyard syndrome and the idea of
Hmm.
you need to look in places you are most familiar yet with. And I don't even listen to myself. It's clear because this site was 200 meters away from Rising Star. The whole story of these three major discoveries. Malapa was a kilometer away from Gladysville, where I spent 17 years. Rising Star was one of the most explored caves in South Africa, in Southern Africa. Everyone knew about it, and yet we hadn't seen it. And this cave was sitting right next to where hundreds and hundreds of scientists have visited. I've shown innumerable scientists this site and said, "Oh yeah, we found a tooth there, but I don't know if it's going to work out or not." And yet, it took COVID to break that pattern of every reason not to do something.
Hmm.
I have other sites in the bag that have hominids in them. And, what I'm going to make sure I promise myself to do is actually get into those as soon as possible. Obviously resources are a problem.
Right.
It's always, they're certainly not infinite. They're actually very precious. And I think that we as a science are going to go through that even more so because of the nature of what we
Definitely.
do is not seen as a medical critical science.
Right.
And so
Right.
I think that it's going to be harder to find resources to open it up. But we have several other hominid sites that could be as good. So what does that tell you? It says get back out, look, and when you find something, throw yourself at it. Yeah, I think it's really hard. Maybe not for your generation, but for my generation, we were brought up that these were the rarest sought after objects on Earth. That you literally were never going to find one of these if you went into the field, that there was no chance of it, that there wasn't uh, an opportunity to find them. You had to be somehow very special. And it's probably hard for your generation, having seen what's happened in the last decade in molecular biology, the discoveries across the world, to really understand what the state of paleoanthropology was. But I mean, it's worth every early career scientist to go read, Tim White's paper in 2001, where he talked about the
Right.
state of paleoanthropology at the millennium. And if you read that, it's over, right? There's nothing left to find. We should stop
Right.
issuing permits. We understand how human evolution was done. That 2001. That's 19 years ago. And what has occurred in the last decade tells us that we had no idea what's going on, and we
Right.
still have no idea what's going on. Molecular biology has shown us introgression, hybridization is a norm. You've got small brain hominids that appear to be doing incredibly complex things. There are species popping up all over the place. We and they're weird and they're wonderful and they don't fit. The brain doesn't just take this march from small brain to large brain. I mean, all you have to do is look at something like Homo naledi, where you have this tiny brain, and I mean truly to Australopithecine level brain, that's more complex than a Homo erectus brain. It's
Mm.
just small.
Right.
And it doesn't work the way we thought it did. And now we have down here in southern Africa, just announced a few months ago, a Homo erectus predating anything in the rest of Africa. And what does it mean? I'm been a proponent that time doesn't matter that much. I don't but if you want to play that game, then you now have Homo erectus here in southern Africa, close to 2 million years, and you don't have it anywhere close to that in eastern Africa. I don't know what that means. You don't have, Homo naledi is 300,000 years old. It's more primitive than that.
Right.
It's all over the place right now, and I think that's a super cool time to be a scientist. But we actually need more people getting out in the field, and we need them finding more fossils. I don't know if you've ever listened to that public radio interview. I think it was a Science Friday interview I had with Bernard Wood, where we actually had a debate back in, it was either early 2013 or late 2012, where he took the stance that we don't need more fossils. And that the idea was we need better ways of analyzing those we have to actually find out what was going on. I, of course, took the other stance that we absolutely need more fossils, and that's how much the field has changed.
Amazing. And I just, you're very right about the generational differences. Personally, I've learned, I like the way you put it. Fossils are the rarest, thing you'll find on Earth. There's nothing more precious or rare. And I learned that from you and listening to you. And it's something that I truly believe, like, a human relative's fossil is just, there's nothing like that.
We're fast making them not the rare sought after objects.
Well, yeah.
I mean, the fossil record has quite literally, in the last 6 years of hominids in Africa, more than doubled in the last 6 years. You want rare fossils, look for carnivores, look for, good complete bovid skulls. Those are rare. The hominids aren't so rare anymore. And I actually was saying that in a different way. I actually think that's an unhealthy attitude. Even though I was one of the propagators of that sort of messaging, because I had to be, because I was one of the least successful paleoanthropologists you'll ever meet until 2008. All you had to do is go to a conference. You go to a conference in the early 2000s, and you'd hear someone snicker in the back room, boy, I've never seen anyone go so far on 2 teeth. As they point to me.
And, right, I remember this from your book.
And it's funny to laugh now. It wasn't so funny. It wasn't so funny back then.
Of course.
I actually don't like that, because I think what it does is it stops people from exploring. It stops people from looking, particularly people who choose to do science. They tend to be relatively conservative in the way they have an outlook. They tend to be people who understand numbers and play with probability. Scientists don't buy that many lottery tickets, I'd wager, because they actually understand the statistical odds. But I can tell you this truism, that, if you don't buy a lottery ticket, you'll never win the lottery. And
exactly.
And if you don't look, you won't find. Exploration is paleoanthropology's version of purchasing lottery tickets. Even though the odds appear to be incredibly small, what I think our teams have demonstrated is they're not that small. Right. The odds are actually pretty good. Someone was saying, what are you doing differently? And yes, I think
was just about to ask you that.
But, I think, yes, we're using, we try to push exploration boundaries. We're trying to use technology, particularly space-based technologies and that in ways. But what we're doing? We're just looking. One of the powers of what we're doing here is the value of not doing parachute science, that we should see more investment in science groups and exploration groups in and near places where these sites can be done. I bet you if you do the math, I've never done it, but I kind of mentally know what the answer to this is. if you look at the average way that field schools or field programs are done in, say, Ethiopia, where most of the science is done by foreign groups that are coming in for periods almost solely during the summer months, and they get in the field for 6 weeks or something like that, during that period at enormous cost of doing that. There's no real reason that they're there during that period. They're there during that period because that's the summer holidays in the Great North. And so what happens is they go for 6 weeks. They find 6, 10, 12, 20 hominid bits and fragments, and they go away and they say, man, these things are super rare. Well, do the math. If you're finding 10 a month, and we're doing that for 12 months a year because we're here at the same price it costs to run one of those expeditions, then we're finding we should be finding 120 hominids a year. Well, we're probably actually not that good. we're probably below those odds. We're probably actually not doing as well as those guys are and gals are. So it's it's a factor of just looking. And when you start doing the math like that, it makes sense what's happening to us. We're just here all the time, and I think that's a big message. And I think that's another thing coming out of COVID that shows us there are smarter ways that we can invest in, and there are smarter ways to do science where everybody wins. If we can instill a concept of open collaboration and open access where you in California are benefiting from our discoveries in a very real and immediate way. We're not seeing them as our private possessions because we work so hard to find them. We come up with novel ways where the countries and places and universities in Africa and other places are benefiting in real ways, so they continue to invest in this type of science and exploration, and everyone's winning. Then there's maybe a smarter way to really increase this science by getting the best from everyone, as opposed to maybe the way we did it 8 months ago. And
Right.
and maybe we should take lessons from that. I'll give you a case in point. We're back in the field. We're under a harder lockdown, that much harder than you in the States, but we're under one of the, we're under as hard a lockdown right now as any country in the world is right now. We went through almost a military level lockdown,
Oh, wow.
and yet our teams are back in the field, and you can watch on YouTube what we're finding. And there's a message there. Maybe this will be the moment where we can redress some of those inequalities that have been built by parachute science. Why aren't there great universities with great departments teaching this and teaching exploration sciences and paleoanthropology in every country in Africa where they're found? Why not? Maybe it's because there hasn't been the investment in that, and now maybe part of that can be redressed. I don't know, but I'm not saying we shouldn't have these shorter expeditions into remote areas and that, and I'm not saying that it should be, but I'm also saying there also is maybe a better way of doing science. It's more collaborative, that's better and more ethical for the countries where these discoveries are made, as well as better and smarter for universities around the world that are interested in this, as well as scientists.
And I think an important thing is always looking for that better way forward. No
Yep.
matter, what you're doing is trying to just improve things. And just from what I've seen you do, it seems every time you have a new expedition or are working on a new project, you've done something to improve the quality of either your workers' lives, the media's attention, or something. And that's just something I admire you for, because
Well, that's the way
you're always
science should
working for
work.
it.
That's the way science should work. I mean, I think you've seen these young South African scientists who are now engaged at the
Definitely,
front
yes.
line of this new discovery. I was, the beauty of it here, I'm sitting on top of my roof garden here in Johannesburg in South Africa right now. And this morning I was out with Toboco looking at a brand new fossil site,
Hmm.
and in the middle of a wilderness area, and spent the entire morning out there with him. And then we split up. I went and looked at the new museum that we're building for Malapa, and he went to go underground into the Lesedi chamber. So and that's the beauty of it.
Right, definitely. And it just, when you say those things, it's odd to my ear. For you, obviously, it's second nature that because you live there. But for me to hear, oh, he went from Lesedi to Malapa to all these places, in a couple of hours is just the fact that all of this is in one place in the cradle is just, why do you think that is?
It's because you ever heard that old joke about, you know, drunks looking for their lost keys under the light of a street light, because that's where the light is. I think that's
Uh,
that's actually, they're not looking for their keys in the dark because there isn't any light there. That doesn't matter if that's where their keys are or not.
right.
And I think
Okay.
that's a little bit about what's happening here. We're looking because other people have looked here and found something, and that the odds that in itself is an exploration bias is an almost certainty in my mind.
Mm,
And so yes, people like me, I get kind of stuck because you make a big discovery and it becomes like a magnet to your life, as it should. It
right.
becomes it's a privilege to be involved with big discoveries, and you have to do them duty and service. You have to build the programs around it, but they have a negative side to it too, because everyone goes, oh well, let's go look there instead of going outside of that light of that street light. uh,
Right.
and instead of looking in other places in other forms. I mean, as an example for that, the site I was at this morning is a perfect example of that. It's a tufa site, and it formed right in the middle of the Dolomitic region. There are no other tufa sites. It was not discovered till I discovered it in early 2008. I actually discovered this site. It's gigantic. It's 150 meters long. It's 20 meters high. Solid plant fossils. They're big tools sitting in caves in it. It's the most magnificent site. It's gonna give us a paleoecological indicator of the late Pleistocene like no other site. It was never seen by a scientist for the 100 years of exploration prior to that in that area. And the reason it wasn't is because it was seen on the shales, not the dolomite. And we
Mm,
all knew, every scientist here knew that there are no fossil sites off the Dolomites. So we didn't literally walk 100 meters off of the Dolomites to make this what's going to be a critical and huge discovery. It's a classic example of that. 2008 was when this site, and it is literally on a road that hundreds of scientists have driven over. I had stood on it before and didn't realize what I was looking at.
which goes back to, your backyard syndrome and everything
Yep.
that you were talking about. Um, Now, when we're going back to the 105 site, you're collaborating with a few different groups on this, correct?
Yep.
One young lady that I've seen, I can't recall her name, and I know I would.
Canelway.
Okay,
Canelway. Yeah.
yeah, I
You
know
can
I
call
would
her
butcher
Kenny.
her
She
name.
she calls herself Kenny. Yeah.
Okay, so Kenny, she has just been lovely watching.
Yep.
Um, and I have learned a lot from her videos, and I'm hoping to see more of her. But
You
what
absolutely will.
exactly is her role?
So she's a paleoanthropologist. So she's just finished her PhD. And what she's going to be doing is leading some of the work that is around the description of some of the postcrania. I'll mentor her along with some of the senior scientists that can't come and look at this stuff from around the world with scanning technology and that. And she's going to be leading some of that work. She's also heavily involved with doing some of the photogrammetry with Paloma, who you'll be introduced to. Paloma is a joint appointment with my chair here in South Africa in Cambridge University, and she's going to be doing some of that. You'll start seeing these characters. What you're watching, you see, is the very slow growth of a team. This is how science happens. We start with the basics. So you haven't met Zubair, who you're going to meet shortly, is a sedimentologist that's just joined our team from Wits University. So Toboko is a geochronologist largely. Zubair is a sedimentologist. And so
Mhm.
they start forming a collaboration as we begin to understand the sedimentology and the context of these fossils. And they will then slowly begin, as the leaders of that process, to bring in collaborating geologists, geochronologists, geophysicists, whoever they need. And they become part of the story. So each person is a small additive. That's how major teams grow. It's just normally what you would see is you would see, you'd hear maybe, oh, Lee made a discovery, then silence, and then 2 years later you would hear announcement, and 47 authors on a paper. You're
Right.
watching the slow growth of that process happening.
Okay. Okay. Which again, I have to just thank you for, because watching this unfold has been, I look forward to your updates very much. Um, where do you think 105, I know you don't know much about the site right now, so any guessing is just guessing.
Yeah.
But where do you think it could lead?
Well, I'll tell you what excites me. A lot of people don't know this, but of the megatooth hominids, I'm being very careful with my terminology here because I'm not saying paranthropines or paranthropus or
Mhm.
even robust australopithecines, because that has a connotation. That's a genus, and it means I'm thinking in one direction, and I'm not necessarily thinking in that direction right now, because I'm not sure that's what this is. It is a megatoothed hominid, but not all megatoothed hominids are paranthropines or are robust australopithecines. There are some
Right.
very large toothed hominids at Sturkfontein, for example. Some of the East African hominids, like Gari,
Mhm.
it has gigantic teeth, and they didn't call that a paranthropine or a robust australopithecine. So I'm being careful with what that is, but already this site has the signs of association of postcranial with craniodental, and so far all of the dentition seems to be cohesive for having one form so far. I can tell you it's not a great, it doesn't look to be, I can't assure you of that, but just given the depth of the deposit and the way it's formed, it looks to be a pretty short period. Now, short in paleontology can be, tens of thousands and 100,000 years, but it doesn't seem to be a huge, it's not, it's not the Sturkfontein member 4 problem, which is tens of meters deep of gigantic, or the Dremelin problem, which is the same issue. It's a pretty small deposit, which holds hope that it is a short time period. Why is that a good thing? Because that gives us, the shorter the time period, the more cohesive the hominid sample is, the more idea we're going to get a real look at the environment and a relatively constrained hominid. And here we have craniodental material with postcranial. Well, for large toothed hominids, there are almost zero occurrences. In fact, there may be zero occurrences of certain association of craniodental with postcranial of material that we know are the same thing. I know that sounds amazing, but it's true. We have a whole bunch of these gigantic toothed hominid heads, and then we have bodies. Scari is a classic example. The teeth are found over here, and the bodies and the skeletons are found. You have no idea that those are two things, the
Right.
same thing. We don't, and that was described in that way because it was described at a time when uh, people, particularly people in Ethiopia, were saying there was only one hominid species at a time existing. That
Hmm.
was the mode they were working in up until, gosh, probably things like Sediba came along, so
Wow.
until like 2008, 10 or so. And there's a reason for that we can get into it sometime in a discussion about why they were thinking like that. So I think this site has a chance of associating postcranial material with craniodental material of a megatoothed hominid. That's really cool. Um, that will be immensely valuable. A lot of people don't know this about me, but actual reason I chose to come to South Africa was I was enraptured by the robust Australopithecines. I just never managed to find one in my whole career. And I was enraptured by the concept of these megatoothed hominids. Uh, but so this may be that site. This may be the site that gives us that, and that will be immensely exciting and immensely important if it is.
Yeah, it sure sounds like it. I mean, to not have any postcranial and, cranial remains together is just, to find them finally would be spectacular.
Well, a lot of people
Now,
don't realize that's the way paleoanthropology, works. A lot of it because of the way to find. In East Africa, you're finding these things scattered across, um, surfaces, often disassociated. And so people have a tendency of going, well, this one looks more human, so I'm going to associate that with the more Homo-like cranium, and this one looks less human, so I'm going to associate that with the robust Australia. We don't know that's true at all. And I'll tell you what our discoveries have taught us, Sediba and Naledi. You need those skeletons attached to each other to know what the bodies look like. You would
yeah,
never put the femur and pelvis of Naledi with that dentition.
right, right. So which just opens the doors to so many questions about previous finds that,
Yep.
yeah. So I think I know the answer to this, but there are a lot of people who would ask, and maybe it doesn't matter anymore, but are you a lumper or a splitter?
Okay, so that's a great question. So I don't think it really matters anymore because I think that that's a terminology that that has died in the 21st century because
Right.
of these finds. Um, I think splitting is more scientific than lumping,
Okay.
and I'll tell you why. Uh, because you can test splitting, and I often think lumping can't be tested. Interestingly, people like John Hawkes, when we first met, we kind of fell on two separate sides of that line, and we've kind of come to closer together in working together for that. But let me give you the simple example. If you assume that there's only one species and everything you find is lumped into that one species, no matter what, then what you end up with is a mega species that is encompasses almost everything. And how do you ever pull that apart? How do you ever test that if your variation is so high, it encompasses everything? And I would point to two species immediately come to mind that are immensely problematic that was done with, and one is Homo erectus, and the other is Australopithecus afarensis. And what was done was, in the late 70s and early 80s, for whatever reason, the discoverers and the people doing the science around that said, okay, this everything we find at a single time period or within a time period is afarensis. There's only one species at any one time. And so what you have now is a species that would be argued to be as sexually dimorphic as a gorilla, maybe more so, as where you have specimens that are so different from each other that they don't look like they're doing the same grade level. And you take the Lorenzo Mill skeleton and compare it to Lucy. And in fact, if you read some of those papers, that I think almost the last paragraph of that paper says they're so different from each other that it proves afarensis is one species. and and so you can almost it becomes an almost non-scientific argument
Right.
that it's so variable that everything you ever find is going to be in the middle of that. Artie's treated that way too, and so that you get people saying, well, the stuff that's coming from Chad needs to be put inside of Ardipithecus, but Homo erectus is the poster child of that problem. And that was done for a very Victorian reason, not based on morphology, it was done on an idea that there was Homo erectus was widespread. It makes the Acheulean, even though there's never been a Homo erectus fossil found in association with the Acheulean directly, a classic one. And so we associate those two things because they exist in the same time, and everything found between, you know, until recently 1.7, 1.8 million years and 400 to 500,000 years is a Homo erectus. And so you get papers that, you know, they find a tiny skull and it could be 4, and because it's 1.5 million years old, it's a Homo erectus, even though. And so the paper is entitled, you know, um, uh, high degrees of sexual dimorphism in Homo erectus. Or you find the gonopelvis, which looks, you know, there's just a pelvis. It must be a tiny Homo erectus pelvis. I once asked one of the scientists on that, and I said, "How do you know that's not a Sediba pelvis?" And because it's about the same age, and the answer was, "Well, we don't have Sediba." And I'm saying, "Well, that's circular." So, getting to very specifically to your question, um, the lumpers, you see, it often is being driven because scientists hate to be wrong. So they actually see it as being conservative. I actually say it's the least scientifically conservative thing you could do, because if you are actually splitting, you can be proven to be wrong. If you call something another species, you may not be able to be proven wrong at that moment, but as the fossil record expands, as molecular biology comes into this, we will eventually be able to test that.
Right.
And so that's, for me, the scientific approach. So by placing forward a refutable hypothesis, and I think most lumping, there are exceptions to this, but most lumping cases are not refutable. And so you end up with something so variable that everything you ever find could be put in the middle of it.
Now, would say a good example of this, just so I understand, when Homo florenziensis was discovered, and there were people who were saying, oh, it's just a Homo erectus, it's an island dwarfism Homo erectus. Were those people just lumping them together just because they, like, how did that, do you know how that?
So yeah, boy, unfortunately, I got in the middle of that, that debate, inadvertently. Okay, so Flores is an interesting question, because that wasn't the huge debate initially. The debate was, is it a real species or is it a pathological dwarf human?
Right, right.
That was the real one. The people who were arguing that it was a legitimate species, you got to remember that was the first fossil that really was thought to violate the idea that only one mega species existed. And so the reason the Homo erectus conversation was, it was actually the people naming a new species were trying to justify the sheer possibility of the existence of something like this by allying it with Homo erectus, even though it looked less like a Homo erectus than probably anything anyone would have ever found in any individual part of its anatomy. And so that was actually a defensive uh, discussion on the part of the people who were trying to argue that it was a legitimate separate species, because they didn't want to face the impossible idea that 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 you know, because everyone knew the only thing that existed in those temporal periods anywhere near them was Homo erectus. And so that was almost like a cover to protect the idea that it was a legitimate species. Most of the world thought it was a pathological um, 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 human dwarf. And here's a point that taught me a great deal about the reason why we should have open access to fossils. The reason that fight got so bitter, and for anyone who doesn't understand how bitter it is, boy, just go back and read. There were careers destroyed over
Yeah.
over that fossil, was because no one could see it. No one could test. And I think it's fairly remarkable. If you open up any textbook today, any current textbook, Sediba and Naledi are in them. And I actually attribute that directly to because we made all the casts, all the scans, all the data available. So that, Seth, you think I'm a jerk and I don't know what I'm talking about, and my colleagues and I are stupid. Well, you go measure it yourself. And you
Right.
can. You can
Exactly.
download it in your home and print it out if you don't believe it. You still can't do that for Flores. You still can't
Right.
do that for practically any fossil from Ethiopia. Did you know that? There's
Right.
actually a law that got passed somehow by some influence in Ethiopia that only the discoverer can have a cast outside of Ethiopia of a discovery. These are little known real problems in our field.
Yeah, I did not know that. That's, and I
That's
assume like if you were to make a second cast, you could use your rights to the first one and to access to
no,
the
no, no.
fossil. And
You can't make a second cast.
no, I'm saying
Every
if you
cast is.
did, you would lose your rights to
Oh,
seeing the
absolutely. I would think
original.
so.
And
I would think so. Oh, yeah. That was a, go back and read Bones of Contentions. When John Hawkes and I did that first, when we brought all those casts of fossil hominids to the American Association of Physical Anthropology, Ann Gibbons actually wrote an article about it in Science. And that was what, 2012 or something like that, because no one had seen casts of
yeah.
fossils. That's how, that's how our field got into a very bad place. I hope those days are dead. I
Hmm.
hope those days are gone, because it's not science if it's not refutable.
I fully agree with that. I think, and I mean, as a testament to that, I'm looking over at my bookshelf and I have a Homo naledi skull sitting on there next to Lucy and a
Well,
Sediba.
and that Lucy's not a legitimate thing. Where'd you get that? Bone
Yeah.
clones? You got it from bone
From
clones, right?
Molly, I got it from Molly Selba, actually.
Yeah, but I bet you it's a bone clones thing or something. It's going to
Some
be a
local
work of art.
source, I thought.
Yeah,
But,
but it's going to be a scan of a artistic reconstruction. That is
huh,
not of the actual fossil.
huh,
That
I
was a
did not
huge
know
debate
that.
with bone clones. Why don't you see Sediba and Naledi at bone clones? There was a huge fight for people who don't know about these histories, but they should. It's important to understand our science. Bone clones started manufacturing casts of all of these fossils. Those are not, those are artistic replicas. Read their caveat. They are not casts of those fossils. They're artistic replicas. They're made by artists. And the reason they are is because once you create art, then there's no copyright on it. So
Right.
the fact is, the reason that you don't go to Bone Clones and don't order a Sediba or a Naledi is because because we give it away.
As you just saw my cat run across the. um, but yeah, I understand that. And I did not know that. And that makes, I mean, that makes a lot of sense why I can download a Naledi skull for free and why a bone clone skull is $500. But um, that definitely makes a lot of sense. I was unaware of that.
But you have to be aware that Bone Clone Skull is not a cast of that fossil.
Yeah, I
And
had
most
no
people
idea.
don't know that. That is not a cast of Lucy's skull you've got on your shelf
Yeah, I did not know that. I'll definitely keep that in mind and, spread the word on that, because I think that's something very important that people should know. Because when you're, I want Lucy's skull, I thought I was getting Lucy's skull, but unfortunately, I guess that's not the case.
there. Not the case.
But and but anyway, I'm glad my other two are true and accurate. Um, but yeah, I had no idea. Now, do you think those laws do you think they're to protect the fossils? Do you think they're to protect special interests? Do you think,
So, I've had discussion with some of the big players in the field, and it's a very sensitive point.
right,
No one will tell you how those laws actually got. The fact is, some legislator in Ethiopia proposed it. It is hard for me to imagine that any legislator in any country would be interested enough to pass laws about accessibility to cats, fossil hominids. But so I suspect that there were other people behind that, that did have a representation, but that may be lost in the annals of history. Who knows? But the point of it is that so I can't really speak to what motivations or reasons
Right.
there would be for it. I can speak to what the effect of it is.
Okay.
What the effect of it is the restriction of access to data except for the super elite and well-connected and powerful. And that's why I'm against it. Because either you have to be in favor with the discoverers or whoever is in control of that to get access to them, or and that has ethical problems for me. I have real ethical problems with that. You have to be in group, because that's how corruption happens. That's how favors are granted. That's also how privilege is created, and patriarchy and all of those type of things.
Right.
And the second part of it is that it prevents science from being done. If I make no other contribution in my career, what I hope I do is be a part of changing that, so that my worst enemies, and I have plenty of them, can see every fossil that we have discovered from the day we discovered it. If anyone knows my history, I gave away casts of Sediba before it was published to museums and scientists around the world. I brought them in and showed people, and I'm a firm believer that makes better science, because the first thing when your worst enemies and worst critics look at a fossil is they're picking it up, and they'll start, Lee, you're a complete idiot, and here's why. And they hold the bone up and they tell me things that I hadn't seen. And then when I go and take copious notes, Lee's an idiot, and the femur is more compressed than that of, and that makes better science.
Right. Definitely. Peer review is the key.
Yeah. Even peer review prior to publication.
Definitely. And I think, you say you have all these enemies, and I don't doubt you. I'm sure you do.
Oh,
but
I
think at least from my perspective and from my community's perspective, you're definitely very highly revered as someone to look up to, and as a scientist who's really in it for the science and for educating others, and not in it for yourself or glory or anything like that.
I hope that's the legacy that this team, the more than 150 scientists and students that are involved in these projects around the world leave. The idea of turning this into a refutable, hypothesis-driven science where data is accessible. And part of the reason that I so focused and passionately seek more fossils is contrary to that idea that Bernard said. I believe more fossils are part of the cure. Mm-hmm. When you make them less precious, going back to where we kind of began this whole conversation, when you make them not the rarest sought after objects, what you do is you reduce the ability of people to use them as weapons to beat each other over the head with, or weapons of power, where I suddenly hold the mandible that I discovered and don't let anyone but my close colleagues see it, and thus only empower them and who I want to give power to. And that's part of the reason I'm so passionate about more fossils.
And I think that's excellent. And I think that is a great way to end this little chat that we're having.
Super.
I have to thank you again just so much for being on here today, or this evening it might be for you.
Sun's going down as we speak.
I just really appreciate it. I know my viewers appreciate it, and I know we will have all learned so much from you. And
fantastic.
Maybe we can do this again in the future.
Never stop exploring.
Yes. Yes. All right. Thank you
All
so
right.
much,
Great talking to
Professor.
you, Seth. Bye-bye.
Definitely. Bye.